Every day, the equivalent of 1,440 garbage trucks of plastic is dumped into our oceans. By the time you finish watching this video, at least 2 truckloads worth of plastic waste will have reached the ocean. Plastic waste generation is set to triple by 2060, and plastic waste leaking into the ocean will also triple by 2040. This is an unacceptable burden to place on future generations. Mismanaged waste is by far the largest source of plastic pollution, with detrimental effects on human health and the environment. Our everyday activities also cause leakage of microplastics through wear and tear of rubber tires, textiles containing plastic, paint, and other sources. Plastic waste that is already in the environment is not just an issue of local pollution, but also a source of microplastics and harmful chemicals. All over the world, people are working hard to handle waste and clean up pollution. But to end plastic pollution, we need a global treaty with common rules that help us turn off the plastic pollution tap. The High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution is committed to developing an ambitious, international, legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution by 2040, to ensure that all parties take measures to eliminate releases of plastics to water, land, and air. Countries should be required to take effective measures to collect, sort, and if necessary, dispose of plastic waste in an environmentally sound manner. Parties to the treaty should set a target to reduce the amount of plastic waste in need of final disposal. They should also be required to work together to address legacy plastic waste, including remediation. We can't do it without you. Let's end plastic pollution by 2040.
Yes, dear colleagues, a very warm welcome to this webinar, Plastics on the Peak, Eliminating Releases of Plastic Waste to Air, Water and Land in Mountainous Regions. Over the coming 90 minutes, we will highlight and discuss why plastic pollution in mountainous regions is important and how the specific challenges of these mountainous regions can be considered within the INC process. This webinar is organized by the governments of Austria and Georgia, both mountainous countries, with support from the High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution. My name is Björn Altan, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Melissa de Kock from UNEP. We're very happy to see a large number of people in this audience today, and we have a fabulous panel of speakers and panelists with us today. The webinar is divided in 2 parts. The first part includes welcoming remarks from Georgia and Austria, and a short crash course introduction into the challenge of plastic waste in mountain regions from our colleague from BRS Secretariat. The second half is dedicated to an interactive panel debate, which will be facilitated by my co-moderator, Melissa, and includes a knowledgeable and diverse list of panelists. We would, as always, like this event to be interactive. So if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question to our panelists, please write in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen, or click the raise the hand button for a live intervention. We will be addressing comments and questions in the second half of the event. As a final note, this event is being recorded and will be available afterwards on the YouTube channel of the High Ambition Coalition. So to kick off our discussions, I'd like to give the floor to Irma Gudguliani, who is the INC focal point for Georgia and the deputy head of the Waste and Chemicals and Management Department of the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture of Georgia. So please, Irma, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello. I hope you hear me already. So I welcome you all the people, attendees, and who has the interest regarding the plastic issues, and especially in our region, to hear about our developments, last developments, and also, of course, we are very keen to hear good experiences from Austria or other countries. Regarding the issues actually raised in our country right now, Georgia aspires to become a country focused on the waste prevention and recycling, which is achieved by taking actions on prevention, reuse, recycling, and recovery of waste, developing waste at source separation and effective municipal waste collection systems at local level, introducing full cost recovery and extended producer responsibility. So actually, we recognize the importance of actions against plastic pollution, and in this regard, Georgia has taken effective steps towards prevention of plastic waste. Since 2018, according to the technical regulation on the rules of plastic and biodegradable bags, we banned the use of plastic carrying bags, and the National Plastic Waste Prevention Program was developed with support of the Embassy of Norway in our country. So there are some issues, some steps already have been taken, but of course, when it comes to the municipalities, especially high mountain municipalities, and according to our law on high mountain areas, actually there are 1,500 about this amount of villages which belongs to the high mountain areas, and especially when it comes to the municipalities, they need special attention to pay when it comes to the touristic area, especially in that high mountain areas. So in this regard, actually, that become one of the priority, and it's stipulated according to our national action plan of waste action plan and strategy. The high mountain areas should be paid much more attention, and we are looking actually to start and developing some kind of pilot projects in this regard. We recognize the challenges, of course, and unfortunately, because of somehow we just in 2015, we approved the new legislation on waste, which is fully harmonized with the EU legislation, EU directives. But one thing is the approving of the legislation, but from another hand, also separation at source, for example, especially when it comes to the packaging waste, it's not well developed right now. So we drafted the regulation, but for the municipalities, it's not easy to implement. And regarding the extended producer responsibility, there are 4 bylaws, and already on electronics, on tires, and etc. But the packaging is the most, I would say, challenging for us. And when it comes especially for plastic, so many stakeholders we have to keep on board, of course. And from our side, what we are supporting all the times, it's through the involvement of the NGO sector in this regard to support municipalities, especially for high mountain places, for touristic areas, for the alpinists. So there were some actions already provided, but that is just a few steps, I would say. We think that when it comes to the issues like transboundary cooperation, so we tried actually a few years ago to develop a Caucasian Convention even, and keep things moving, I would say, in this regard. But there was supportive organization like Regional Ecological Center for Caucasus. So, and all 3 countries, at least in our region. So we tried somehow to come up with those issues, but unfortunately, we could not finalize this one. But when we are speaking now, right now, and Georgia actually was supportive to the UN resolution, like to start development of this plastic new legal instrument, and we are fully involved in this process. And of course, when it comes to the circularity approach also, we at the same time working on the development of the strategy of circular economy in our country. And there are some supporter organizations already, like Sweden and other countries, and from EU as well. And we as a part of the EU Association Agreement, of course, there are priorities already, and we try our best somehow to follow the circularity approach, whether it's the waste management or whether it's the bottom-up approach. And even what we are expecting right now from this new legal instrument somehow to start thinking about the chemicals of concerns, of course, and other international obligations already, which we have already regarding the BRS conventions and the synergy should be taken into account. Working on these papers, I mean, on the legal instrument. And in this regard, I would say that the targets, actually, when it comes to the targets and the implementation of the targets, as we already prepared, I would say, this national program for plastic prevention, that is like first step for us to see what should be done. And from another point of view, there should be created also countries like developing countries or countries in economic transition. It's very necessary to have some kind of supporting, I would say, the line during the development of this legal treaty and keep all the, I would say, all the stakeholders involved in this process. So, and when it comes to the product design or whatever, like EPR development and EPR's extended producer responsibility, I mean, to create in the countries and support somehow those kind of developments. But main issue is that we as a I would say implementing the EU Association Agreement actually, and we are looking forward to become maybe one day a member of the EU country. So I mean, all those approaches for us, it's very important to have in place all the strategic approaches and also the good practices which already has been implemented in many countries, in European countries or whatever, other countries. We are very open actually to take good examples and bring some kind of much more attention, especially mountain regions. As you see, we have quite a number of the countries, and they are also looking to these developments, and they really want to bring all the new developments to their municipalities. And somehow for our government, it's very important to have all the stakeholders on board and also bring some capacity building programs as well to countries and to the municipalities like we are. So looking forward for further developments, of course, and for further discussions. Thank you. Maybe we'll come back again somehow.
Thank you very much, Irma, for that intervention on behalf of Georgia and for outlining some of the challenges, particularly with high mountain areas, tourism, your expectations and possible synergies with the BRS Convention. And I'm sure some of these points will be picked up on later on in the webinar. So now I'd like to hand over to Renate Pauermann, who is the INC focal point for Austria and a policy officer at the Federal Ministry for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation and Technology. So please, Renate, the floor is yours.
Thank you. On behalf of the ministry, I would like to thank everybody who joins us for this very important webinar. We have already heard why the mountain regions are so important for us. It's because they provide freshwater resources, they host a lot of biodiversity, and last but not least, they are also of economic importance. I only want to mention tourism, which is more and more increasing also in Austria, in the mountain regions. However, at present, the issue of plastic waste and microplastic in the mountains does not attract so much attention, like for instance, ocean plastic. And it's also a fact that most pollution in the oceans and the seas comes from land-based sources. So for us, it's obvious that the future plastic treaty, the future instruments, has to pay a high attention to the issue of plastic waste in mountains. Yeah, in order to meet this objective, we need different measures for the whole life cycle, and also not only for the waste stage. And all actors have to be involved, not only the government as such, but also other actors need to help. Some of the core obligations of the potential core obligations of the future treaty are of particular importance for the mountain regions. I would like to mention only some examples. For instance, the elimination and restriction of plastic products which are problematic or avoidable. For instance, single-use plastic bottles or cigarette filters. Then we have other important measures, for instance, stopping the open burning of plastic waste, proper landfilling. Economic instruments can also play a very important role. Irma has already mentioned them, for instance, extended producer responsibility or fees. When it comes to the question of proper waste management, also the informal waste sector could play a very important role. And it's also about data and monitoring. So there is a need for a certain database or information so that each party could afterwards report about how they want to reduce plastic waste in mountains. Of course, also awareness raising and voluntary initiatives play a very important role. Awareness raising, for instance, in schools, in the public, but also in other sectors. And what we should also not forget is that in the mountain regions, we need also to address the already existing plastic waste. We think that we should focus on hotspots because we cannot we cannot do cleaning everywhere, so we need to focus on the hotspots. We see here a role also for the national action plans, which could then be incorporated in the plastic instrument or treaty. I can give you later on also some examples how we do it in Austria, what action plans we have in this area. Yeah, in general, we need to keep this high ambition, and exchange of experience, best practice is very, very important. I'm very keen to provide you later on some examples of our practical experience, and I'm also happy to learn from your experience. I'm looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renata. I think that was a very clear position from Austria on several points. From data monitoring to life cycle assessments to core obligations to looking at hotspots. So I think we have a very clear position on Austria where you want to go with this. And I hope we can pick up on many of these points from you and from Irma in the panel debate. So now I'd like to move to the next part of the webinar, where we'll have a talk from Manoush Azudi, who is the program officer at the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. She will give us a short crash course in the various challenges of plastic waste in the mountains. So over to you, Manoush. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bjorn. I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation for today. So thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Today, I'm going to give you a very short 10-minute presentation, or Bjorn said, crash course into challenges that we're facing today in regards to plastic waste in the mountains, on behalf of the Secretariat of Basel, Rotterdam, and the Stockholm Conventions. So why our mountains are so critical? And you guys are all mountain enthusiasts, and I'm sure you don't need a lot of introduction to this, but mountains are very critical and at the same time very sensitive. They are a very important water repository, and they are crucial for well-being of both highlands and inlands. They host half of the world's biodiversity hotspots. They are also extremely vulnerable to human exploitation, such as climate change, pollution, and waste. For today, we're going to address three important questions. The first one is, what drives the plastic pollution, plastic waste pollution in the mountains? Second is that why is it particularly challenging with the environmentally sound management of plastic waste in the mountainous regions? And then the last, how can we make progress in addressing this issue? The first question is, what are the drivers of plastic waste pollution? I think I don't think there's any one of us that would say that they have been to mountains or remote areas and they haven't seen any waste or plastic waste. We know that during these past several years, there has been increased tourism. And with tourism, you have increased amount of waste that it appears in the mountains. You have the hospitality sectors, the hotels and the restaurants in the mountainous areas. That's where a lot of plastic waste, in particular, single-use plastic waste and plastic packaging is found. The other one factor is economic growth and increasing in our consumption behavior and patterns. That also is a contributing factor. As the tourism increases and our consumption and our access to probably affordable products packaged in plastics increases. Therefore, we leave this plastic waste behind when we visit mountains and national parks in mountainous areas. Then we have also, of course, this atmospheric transport of microplastics, and that is when you have the fragmentation and degradation of plastic waste over time, and you end up with microplastics that do not respect boundaries, and they can be found anywhere on the planet Earth. Second question, what drives the plastic pollution in mountainous, or the first question, what drives the plastic pollution in the mountainous areas? We don't have comprehensive information and data on a global basis of how much plastic waste we're looking at in the mountainous areas, but we already have some ideas through certain studies that itself provides an opportunity for data collection. For instance, there was a global survey that Great Arundel conducted in 2021. More than 1,700 mountaineers responded from 74 countries. An overwhelming majority of mountaineers who responded to the survey found that, you can see in the picture, 88 and 87%, they observed hard or soft plastic bottles, plastic packaging, single-use plastic in the mountains, in particular, or on the sides of the trails, at the rest stops, at the car parks. Overwhelming majority of them, above 90%, really felt that this is a concerning issue that needs to be addressed. So what makes it very challenging in regards to plastic waste in the mountainous areas? There are inherent challenges to mountainous areas. There are often harsh climate, high elevation, and these areas have very low development and very little infrastructure to address, control, collect, and bring back the waste that is left on the mountains. Therefore, you have these little infrastructure, and on top of that, you can add the high transport cost to it that would add everything together, would complicate the picture for addressing the plastic waste. And then you also have not sufficient legal and institutional frameworks that would be able to assist with the situation. There is also lack of awareness or incentives that could help people perhaps to not leave their waste behind and bring them back. Therefore, you have an increasing amount of legal dumping of the waste or open burning of the waste in the mountainous regions. Now that we talked about the challenges that we're facing, let's talk a little about solutions. What could we do? There are multiple things that we could do. And as you can see in this slide, there are policy solutions, financial, infrastructure, and outreach. For the next few slides, I'm going to give a very quick one example for each of this. We did a survey on our site and we collected some very nice examples of what people and different countries have done in different parts of the world to address plastic waste issue in their mountains. Policy, we all know that is important. If the policy that is adapted to the national or local circumstances, that is well communicated, that can be enforced, can be effective. And a good instance of that is a national park in Tanzania that implemented trash in, trash out system, and it worked really well to effectively reduce the amount of plastic waste in the national park. Infrastructure, as I mentioned, infrastructure can play a huge role, but oftentimes these are low developed, high elevation areas. They are hard to access, and therefore transport cost is high, and you have no infrastructure to deal and tackle the plastic waste. However, there are good examples of coming up with a smarter collection and transport systems. And one example of that is in Kazakhstan, that for the first time, they actually implemented a full cycle infrastructure for waste management. Financing, everybody agrees you always need financing for everything we do. The plastic waste management is not an exception, and it can be often expensive in that sense. But there are schemes, and more different regions and different countries in the world are looking into them and implementing them, including extended producer responsibility schemes, deposit and return schemes, fees, taxes. These often create an incentive for the individuals to actually become more proactive in collecting their waste when they visit mountains. For instance, in Nepal, in Langtang region, people can bring their plastic bottles and exchange it for 1 Nepalese rupee. Outreach is the last that I'm going to refer to for this presentation, but it's not the least important. It's very, very, very important. Outreach, communication, awareness raising on the individual level, on the local level, national level, and even on global level. It can eventually help and it can depend on each single one of us to learn and educate ourselves and others that when we visit mountainous areas to bring back the waste. And for instance, Switzerland, they installed 1,200 boards in 50 ski resorts, and that actually very much helped to reduce the amount of waste dumping. Addressing plastic waste in mountains is an issue that needs action and intervention in various levels. At local level, municipalities, park administrations, mountain guides, individuals can work together to come up with solutions. At national level, well, we could countries can come up with legal and institutional frameworks. At regional level, oftentimes plastic waste in the mountains or the mountains themselves do not respect the boundaries, and the plastic waste can just be moved from one region to another, and therefore cross-border cooperation and regional instruments could be helpful. At that global level, there are several international initiatives, partnerships, and agreements. For instance, under the Basel Convention, you have the plastic waste amendments. The BRS COPs established the plastic waste partnership that provides technical assistance in building capacities. And you also, under the Basel Convention, you have the provisions for minimization and prevention of plastic waste, among other initiatives that I'm I'm not going to get too much into it, but if you're interested, you could always contact us. At the end, I'm going to end this short presentation with telling you a little bit of what we're doing at the Secretariat of Basel Convention and this Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention with the very generous contributions from the governments of France and Norway, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation and Norwegian Retailers Environment Fund. We have several pilot projects, one that we have started in the Shar Mountains in North Macedonia, and several others that we're going to start in 2023 onwards in Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Lesotho, Mauritius, Nepal, Peru, Rwanda, on addressing the plastic waste in mountainous areas. If you're interested to learn more about any of these projects, we have several fact sheets developed on our website, but you can always also contact me or my colleagues. And with that, I finish this very short and sweet presentation. And back to you, Bjorn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manoush, for this introduction. And I think it was quite a very good crash course and sort of common baseline for everyone to move forward on this panel debate. So I'd like now to move to the second part of the webinar, which is the panel discussion actually. And I'd like to hand over to my co-facilitator, Melissa. I think we're more or less on time, Melissa. We've got about 58, 59 minutes for the panel debate. Over to you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bjorn. Thank you all very much. My name is Melissa de Kock. I'm the head of the Biodiversity, People and Landscapes Unit at UNEP. So thanks to Manoush for that fascinating, if not frightening, presentation. A stat I discovered recently, just building on that presentation, was that microplastics have now been found as high as 8,400 meters above sea level, just below the summit of Mount Everest. And that the annual per capita plastic consumption in parts of the Carpathian Mountains have increased from 1 kilogram per person in 2010 to 20 kilograms in 2015, mostly due to tourism. So the generation of plastic waste, as we've seen from these presentations, is surging across mountain communities, endangering freshwater resources, biodiversity, and posing risks for downstream regions. So from our esteemed panel today, we're going to hear a little more about the challenges, but mostly about the solutions, how to eliminate the release of plastics into mountain ecosystems. So joining us on the panel today, in addition to Renata Pauwman that you've met, Irma Giuliani that you've met, and Manoush Azodi that you've met, we'll also have Ms. Kika Bradsford, the director of Akeso Pan Am, working across the mountains of the Americas, Mr. Raghav Matu, co-founder of Doko Recyclers in Nepal, and Mr. Gaël Leroux, from the research director at the University of Toulouse, France. So as we would like to make this a very interactive session, we do ask that you put your questions in the question and answer box, or that you raise your hand after the interventions of the panelists to enable more interactivity. Thank you very much. So to get us started, opening question for everyone. What are some of the specific challenges with regards to plastic management that you see for mountain regions? And can you share some of the best practices and solutions that you have experienced in your work? And I'd like to get us started asking Gaël, Kika, or Raghav for their inputs, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I can start. I think the presentation was really a good summary of the challenges and also the issues we are facing with mountains, since those areas are really important for humanity and for biodiversity. We should also mention that those areas are facing other issues such as climate change, and also sometimes we are facing also difficulties to develop them economically speaking, and this is quite important, that sometimes there could be some conflicts between tourism, for example, and economical development, and the use or the misuse of plastic, and that's quite important. I would like to mention that. Secondly, as mentioned in the presentation, plastic in the mountains could be of two origins. One is quite obvious, it's a use of plastic locally. But as mentioned by the presentation, we show with my team and other colleagues in US, in China, and in UK also have shown that mountains are, let's say, suffering from microplastic and nanoplastic fallout from lowland valleys, and even from microplastics that can be transported from the oceans to the mountains. So we have really a cycle of microplastic in there. And finally, biophysically speaking, mountains are also really specific. That means, for example, mechanical fragmentation because of snow, ice, cold, and also because of UV weathering lead to more microplastic and nanoplastic in these environments. So even if you can think that there are less plastic, macroplastic, big waste in mountain environment because they are remote, pristine, because of those specific conditions, you can imagine that microplastic and nanoplastic will be more abundant compared to cities and agricultural lowland places. So that's quite important to know. It's important to investigate and to know what is the status of plastic and microplastic and nanoplastic pollution in those environments.
Thank you very much for that. Dare I ask you if you have some of how are some of these issues potentially solved? I mean, I know obviously microplastics and nanoplastics are often beyond the scope of what we can do on the ground, but I'd be interested to hear if you have any potential ideas.
Sure. We got the opportunity with thanks to European funding to investigate also macroplastic pollution between Spain, Andorra, and France. And there we can really see that illegal dumping is clearly from tourism, just is a big issue. And in Andorra, there are just cleaning every month places that are facing illegal dumping. And with that, it's a way for tourism. The tourists are coming to the mountains and say, oh, where I can throw my waste. And there is no places with illegal dumping. And so instead to put their waste somewhere in the mountains where nobody's coming, or they're thinking nobody's coming, they're bringing their waste back. So I think anyway, a good plastic is a plastic that is not brought to the mountain. So that's the first step first.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for that. Kiko Raghav, do you have any thoughts to add to Gail's?
Hello, everyone. Just to add to that, I'm from Nepal, and our waste system strongly relies on the informal waste sector, who actually brings back entire waste to the whole value chain. So one of the biggest challenges that we see right now in the mountain areas is informal waste workers are not interested in collecting back plastics because of the nature of plastics, because it's voluminous in nature, and the logistic cost doesn't make sense to bring it to lower altitude. So that has really hampered the whole collection of plastic, and rather the sector is focused more on bringing other kind of waste, which is metal, paper, or let's say even beer bottles and other types of waste. And in Nepal, what we have seen is out of, let's say, 100 municipalities that has been surveyed, more than almost 40 to 50 municipalities, they still use dumping right next to the rivers as one of the practice, and which is normally every monsoon season, it's flown away by, let's say, strong water waves. So that is the normal practice. And second common practice is burning of plastic waste. So these are the only two practices which are actually being done right now. So what we have done in few communities, especially in mountain communities, is we have tried to bridge the gap where the informal waste workers can actually collect large volume of plastics from one location so that it's economically feasible for them. So what we have done is we have built up community recycling centers and set up some kind of collection network within the households and businesses in that area, which gets to a facility, and then we sort the waste. And every now and then the informal waste workers, they do show up in those communities and they are ready to buy those kind of waste. So that has worked in some of the communities where we have worked. And also what we have done is in mountain areas, the biggest waste out of it within plastic is the non-recyclable fraction. It's the packaging waste, which is the biggest fraction. And now that is not of interest for the informal waste workers also. Now there's no solution other than burning or dumping. So for now, what we have proposed in these communities is just building rudimentary pits to store these kind of plastic waste, so that at some point of time we can recover these plastics and actually send it to, let's say, a cement factory or similar industry for processing these kind of waste. So these are some of the practices which has helped us to solve at least some part of the waste problem.
Thank you for that. So just a question for my understanding. You said in the beginning that it wasn't economically viable for the people to bring plastic waste off the mountain. Why is that?
Because in mountain areas, waste management itself is weak, and it's not really, the collection system is not so strong that you have one point where all the waste is brought and segregated into different fractions. It's kind of scattered into different places, and they're not interested to collect from point A to point B. So that is a bigger challenge for them. So if you just set up a system where a centralized collection happens, then they are interested to take it.
Excellent, thank you for that. Would any of our other panelists like to respond on this question about the specific challenges with regards to plastic management? And also if there's any best practices and solutions that you can showcase?
Well, I'd like to just bring a few issues coming from like a perspective of a climber and civil society that like tries to provide and protect access and conservation to mountain areas in America. And like I heard a lot of my colleagues over here in the webinar talking about like the impact of the tourist industry. And like I would say I'm a tourist, and I'm an outdoor recreation. So like I'm not only experiencing the plastic pollution like firsthand a lot of times, but also like trying to see how like what the challenges are and the best practices. And I think like most people brought like some of the challenges like at a bigger scale. Like I'd like to just zoom into what local people and like human beings can actually do, and like the challenges, which is like basically changing behaviors, because our society now kind of pushes our immediacy, and also just the fact that like we just want to use things that are comfort and that are easy and that are fast. So like this high consumerism like that is imposed in our society, like by cultural practices and historical practices, is something that like it's very challenging to disrupt. And that's where like some of the best practices at this smaller scale can come up, like by creating programs and protocols for like people, like regular people, not necessarily government, or like bigger scale stakeholders can actually do and take actions on their hands. And Access Open Am, like with working with local communities and climbers and hikers and mountaineers in the Americas, have been trying to address those challenges by empowering people to take actions on their hands. And by doing that, we're hoping to influence behaviors and also create a little bit of data, like informing policy holders and local land managers of the type of trash we're encountering in the mountains, and like where they are located, and the quantity and the quality of that plastic or that trash in general. So with Montaña Limpia, like this program we created in 2013, and we had just bringing people from all over the Americas to do trash collection throughout mountain areas. And in 2019, we developed an app called Montaña Limpia, so Clean Mountain, to register not only where those trash were located, but the type of trash. So like in 2019, for example, we saw that plastic was the highest type of trash found throughout like over 30 trash collections that were done throughout Latin America. And by decentralizing actions and engaging and empowering local communities, we just want to have people to show them they have agency, they have a voice, they have a way to combat things that sometimes might feel like out of their hands because the government doesn't do that, or like my country doesn't do the other thing. But just like really emphasizing that we all have our responsibilities into our hands and we can take action. Like we are just trying to bring not just the awareness, but also like this empowerment and action into everyone's hands.
Thanks for that, Kika. I think that's absolutely excellent. Just a reminder that waste is often caused by people and can be stopped by people. And even if you didn't bring it into the area, if you help to carry it out, that's at least doing something. So that's very helpful. Irma, please go ahead.
So, yeah, thank you, for your excellent presentation. So, I just want to share our experiences regarding, to changing the behavior, really, it's very hard. But regarding the actions, actually, what we provided with support of NGOs, of course, that was quite a huge program, Clean Up Georgia. We started, it was around 2012 or something like that. Then we continued, like, Keep Georgia Tidy, like it was like a campaign, So, and we did quite a lot of cleanup actions, on touristic areas, especially when it's mountain or even municipalities, some cultural sites were in also, local population, they were involved in this process. We did that work, but we looked also and monitored the process. What was the result? Okay, the first year we cleaned that area, the next year again, we go there. So if it's not the systematical way somehow, or without sustainability, I would say, and I don't know how to incentivize the process. We tried quite a lot. We shared something, tax and etc. to the municipalities, local municipalities. But I would expect, for example, much more from the protected areas because they have management teams, and especially when it's transboundary protected areas, and they have their own finances, I would say, for the management, etc. So if they will make, I would say, come up with the best practices or best solutions, or I heard also from Austria also, it's not only just plastic, but many issues. But anyway, this type of actions, it just helps, of course, in terms of legacy of plastic in mountain areas, especially. That's horrible sometimes to see. But the monitoring process is also not easy. And any of these municipalities, because it's periodically, some season, depending, I would say, streams are there, I would say, in mountain areas especially. So that's very important to somehow to solve. Even the policies are in place. Municipalities, they have their own waste management plans, everything. But we have to somehow create much more measures, I would say, to change behavior. And at least anyway, if it's not available, so I would say, let's somehow move on, like with the banning of some chemicals, at least in the plastics.
Thanks for that, Irma. You've actually nicely brought me to my next set of questions, which is less about individual. Oh, sorry, Renata, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted like to share some example of Austria, what we do to face this challenge of mountain waste. So one rule we found is that if there is already waste, it attracts even more waste. So we have to avoid even the tiniest piece of plastic waste in the mountains. And some examples, what we do in Austria is that, like in Switzerland, we have also our Alpine Club, which built up some pictures where the hiking routes started, and saying, for instance, keep your mountains clean. This is also in the small hotels in the mountains. It said, keep the mountains clean, so that the hiker and mountaineers see it all the time. Then we have a lot of volunteer which contribute to clean up activities in the mountains. The same like in US, we have, for instance, an app which the people scan the waste in the mountains and what to monitor the amount and the type of waste. And what we found is, like in other countries, that, for instance, bottles or plates and cigarette filters are found quite frequently, which is sometimes forgotten that cigarette filters also are plastic waste. And but I think we have a quite broad range of potential measures, not only voluntary measures, but also legal measures. So in our waste management law, it's clearly said that it's forbidden to throw away, and it can also be fined and punished. Of course, it's difficult how to enforce that, but in principle, it's forbidden. And what plays a really important role, in my personal view, is the economic aspect, because we now want to install a deposit system for plastic bottles in the next years. So if you buy them, you have to pay a little bit more money, and when you bring back, you can get money. And this could be really some incentive to collect this and bring it back to the from the mountains. So I think it has to be the top priority to avoid plastic. Of course, we need to address the whole life cycle and all stages, but the top priority should be to avoid waste and don't leave your plastic waste in the mountains.
Thank you very much. You've actually partially answered my follow-up question to the panel, which is basically, what is the role of national policies and action plans in eliminating plastic waste in mountainous regions? Now, obviously, no trash in or any trash in, trash out policy would be one of them. But what else could the role of national policies and action plans be in this, including from the perspective of civil society and business? This is a question for the whole panel. So Renata, don't feel that you put on the spot. Thank you. Ragav, from your perspective as a...
Should I start?
Oh, go ahead, Renata.
Yeah. In our view, the national action plans under the Plastic Treaty could have a very important role, because they can be tailor-made, meeting the needs of these countries. So we have very different situations all over the world, and these action plans could really address the specific challenges. Of course, it will be needed also to monitor and report how these action plans are enforced. So we need some kind of compliance mechanism.
Thank you. Irma, over to you.
when it comes to the prioritization, I would say even at national level, so we really paid quite a lot of attention to this issue. So one thing is that it's already prioritized. It's already as in one of the biggest objective for the next 5 years, like to treat somehow against the plastic waste. It's already there. There is also developed very nicely plastic prevention program, etc. But for our government, like for our country, I would say, the implementation and enforcement of to achieve that goals, actually what we kept already there. So it's very important to get some financial support. So thanks to donor organization, once when it's already prioritized at the national level, then it's much easier like to have these donors on board. I mean, look, we have this problem, we have these challenges already identified, and based on that, we came up to do something. I mean, so there is already willingness announced, I would say. So that will somehow, okay, we bring the donors, of course, on board. We try quite a lot. But look now, for the local governments, because it's not really easy, I mean, we are from different worlds. So in our municipalities, for them, they are like expecting from national authorities actually to bring at least some of the projects, even it's awareness raising, or even awareness raising or training for the municipalities itself who work on this issue, how to treat that, what to do. I mean, because the national prioritization, they have to follow, they have to have in their national one as well, the local action plans, I mean, the municipal level. But from the budget, unfortunately, when it's subsidized, they have this subsidy only for collection of the provide service during the population. But going to the mountain areas, of course, because the remoteness and limited resources, I mean, it's there. I mean, it's not easy for them. So we are on board always, like national governments, like somehow to support, push them somehow. But what is also very important, when it's nationally prioritized already, then NGOs, also other stakeholders, will pay much more attention. And with support of government, also those NGOs will belong to the donor organization. If there is any funding opportunity, they can get this kind of, I mean, action-oriented good projects. But there are some pilot projects. But anyway, these pilot small projects, even, you know, that can play a very good role. I mean, the neighboring municipalities are involving in these processes. So, I mean, schools are involved in these processes. I mean, it really affects. So the role of the national governments really is the key, I would say, to pay much more attention. But of course, the NGOs always like to bring to somehow do much more actions at local level, and with the cooperation also with the, I mean, centralized governments or the locals, it should be always connected. I mean, to bring all these new developments to them. Look, this is the priority. You have to act right now. So this is ongoing right now. So for them, it's really very important. And based on our experiences, I mean, at least since 2015, as the legislation entered into force on waste management, because before that, there was no legal piece of law, I mean, on waste. So that's why there was no strategy, no action plan, and it was too chaotic, I mean, and now they are much, I would say, open their eyes, I would say, and looking forward, like to do some much more, I would say. So, and yeah, this really has the effect, I would say.
Irma, thanks for that, and I'm glad to hear that you feel that there's a lot more focus on this issue now. Two last questions before I go to the floor. A question for Manoush. What lessons can be learned from the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm, conventions for the future plastics treaty? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. The Basel, Rotterdam, and the Stockholm Convention have a very clear objective, and that is to protect the human health and the environment from hazardous chemicals and waste. And in that regard, BRS conventions have some provisions. Those provisions including importance of a financial mechanism, importance of a compliance mechanism, challenges in identifying chemicals in products, means of implementation, science policy interface. These are important and perhaps could be of relevance or interest to the Plastic Treaty or the INC, the negotiators at the time. There is also provisions for information exchange and international cooperation. Under the Basel, Rotterdam, and the Stockholm Convention, you also have the role of guidance and guidelines. For instance, the new global treaty that is underway for the plastic waste wants to promote, among others, the environmentally sound management of waste. And for instance, in the past conference of parties of the BRS that took place in the first 2 weeks of the May, there was the adoption of the technical guidelines on the environmentally sound management of plastic waste under the Basel Convention. And there are also other relevant guidance documents. These all could be of relevance to the INC that is coming up pretty soon.
Excellent, thank you. That actually leads me to a question from the floor, some of which you might have answered, but I'm going to read it in its entirety. How is the BRS Convention going to work on making synergies for the upcoming Plastic Convention? How are the plastic partnership outputs going to be used in the INC?
That is a good question. So we have within the Secretariat colleagues that who are going to be present at the INC. Of course, it is up to the negotiators to have a look at the guidelines that was adopted by the Conference of Parties. And apart from that, we have the decisions of the Basel Convention that during the COP14 of the Basel Convention that amended the annexes 2, 8, and 9 to the Basel Convention, and that changed the scope of plastic waste that was covered by the convention. So I'm not going to go deeper or in more details into all of those, but it would be important, and the COP asked the parties who are going to be working also in the INC and the future of the plastic waste to consider that this work and this future instrument is fully coherent with the and is complementary to the BRS conventions. And also they recommended the BRS COP recommended to the parties that they avoid duplication of actions that is already set out in the relevant provisions of those conventions, and also advised to promote cooperation and coordination with these conventions. And at the end, maybe the expertise of the Secretariat and the parties and the experience that is built up in implementing these 3 BRS conventions could be fully shared to help the INC in their deliberations.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that comprehensive response. Okay, I'm now going to go to the floor. I see a couple of initial questions. These are questions for all the panelists, so please do feel free to interject. What role do you see for including consumers in the fight against plastic pollution? How can they help to resolve this world plastic pollution crisis?
I'd like to, yeah, that's actually a great question, because it brings back like to our behaviors, right? Our choices that we make when we actually start buying or think about buying something. And I am a firm believer that, like human behaviors need to be changed in order to promote like long-term conservation. And I am originally from Brazil, and I grew up there. And now I live in the United States. So very different economic perspectives. And I see how much privilege people from the developed countries have as far as choices of consumerism. And like, it's so much easier to be sustainable over here, to choose the right things for the environment and like social, like, and social ecological environment, right? Not just the biodiversities and like the environment, the nature of it. And whereas like in Brazil or other developing countries, we don't have that much choice. And I think like, yeah, it's a very important point of bringing the choices of consumers when choosing whatever they are opting for their lives. But it's also important, and an important awareness that there's a lot of privilege out there, and some people have less choice than others as far as what they can afford and what they can choose from. So just like a little bit of food for thought.
I think that's an incredibly powerful point. So while consumers have a role to play, the companies that provide the goods also have a role to play, so they can provide consumers with that choice. A question for Regav. What is the role of the informal sector in plastic waste management, especially in a rural or a mountainous context?
For, I think, countries like us, informal waste workers, they play almost as equal role as a circular economy policy in a developed country, because we do not have circular economy policies yet in our country, and still it's working through the informal channels. So they do play a significant role, but how do we increase, or how do we incentivize them further to actually work in plastic, more focus on plastic? And that can only happen through policies like EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, which will kind of help us to actually channel more funds for them to actually work on the collection network. So that is one big thing that will solve some part of this problem. And second is the recognition of informal waste workers to actually make them include in the formal economy, because right now it's being operated in a very informal way, and also not recognizing any kind of national, let's say, stats, or also to provide any kind of benefits such as insurance or health benefits. So bringing them in this kind of system where municipalities actually register them in some kind of system and provide some kind of support will help them to continue this kind of work that they have been doing, and probably they will do it with much more eager and enthusiasm to actually work in the sector. So yeah.
Thank you for that. So another question from the floor. For all of our panelists, what innovative approaches or technologies can be employed to tackle plastic waste management challenges in mountains areas?
Well, I can answer. I think no. There is no. It's too hard. Infrastructure are absent. Economically speaking, it won't make no sense. So again, we should not bring plastic if not useful. Those, for example, single-use plastic are not useful. So, yeah, we, as mentioned in one of the chat, we should not put too much pressure on the tourist or on the inhabitant of the mountains, and we should put pressure on the industry producing single-use plastic, because those plastic should not be brought to mountains and even elsewhere. I mean, those type of plastic are not useful for plastics that could be useful for economical development, like used in the hospitals or elsewhere. It makes sense. And some plastics are very light. So those polymers, because we are speaking about different type of plastic and polymers, those plastics could be useful because they are light. So it's economically speaking useful to bring them to the mountains. It's cheaper. But for single-use plastics, especially for packaging, it makes no sense to bring them to the mountains. And so the simplest way to avoid mismanagement of those waste is not to bring the plastic to the mountains. So, but unfortunately, there is no way, especially in the mountains, to deal with plastic pollution. It's economically speaking too expensive, And for specific areas like remote places, it's very hard to bring them back. And especially if the microplastic are now in micro or nanoplastics, those plastics cannot be resolved. Those plastic pollution cannot be resolved. So unfortunately, it's a very good example, like in the oceans, where we cannot tackle plastic pollution easily.
Thanks for the answer. Depressing, but thank you for it. Kika.
Yeah, just like piggybacking on that, like just bringing like also the idea that some plastics, like we're not actually carrying like as in food and everything, but just like they're in our clothes, they're in our equipment, you know, like backpacks, for example, climbing ropes, they are all made of plastic and they all like shed. So like when we talked about like the responsibility of companies, you know, outdoor recreation product companies are now starting to create solutions or create other types of material that one less than plastic and have different properties too. So I think it's like a very huge responsibility on the companies themselves to look for those materials and to make sure that they're affordable for people like all over the world. And just like thinking about like what type of materials are more sustainable than plastic. So it sheds less, it creates less microplastics and just provides a little bit more like producer responsibility long term.
Thanks. I'm hearing a lot about extended producer responsibility here. But Irma, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just want to echo previous respondents actually regarding the how to avoid what type of technologies. I mean, there are still technologies in the water, in the seas, but unfortunately, we still have this challenge. I mean, to all the planet. So I'm afraid that of course, technologies are going to develop, but I mean, that takes time. So, and especially countries with development, I would say, coming up with, especially when it comes to the single plastic, I mean, we have to be somehow very strict in this regard, just to give good creative assessment for each of the countries, how big problems it creates, especially, and especially when it comes to the water and clean air and etc., it scares the resources and etc. So it really affects. So we know all that. So why we are here. That's why it's very important to somehow, of course, the EPR is one of the key elements, but anyway, it doesn't say that we will ban single plastic. I mean, it's up to the governments. So with the legal threat is actually what we have to go, whatever it's mountain, whatever it's the sea area, or whatever is the marine environment, I mean, we have to be somehow to decide that those chemicals cannot be used in the plastic, I mean, and some of the countries might allow ourselves like to ban some single plastics, bringing to the national parks or something like that. These kind of actions will take place for sure. But I mean, for now, right now, I mean, incentives, creating incentives even for the producers, that really matters. And I mean, countries like we are, unfortunately, we could not allow ourselves. We are trying quite a lot, really, but it's not easy when it comes to the economy or social development. I mean, it's not that easy. I mean, in countries like we are, developing countries or countries with economic transition. So, I mean, there are many good examples, I mean, in this regard, like without banning, say no to some of the chemicals in plastic. I'm sorry, but for now, I don't see any good, I would say, the way like to follow. So it's up to the countries and governments, I would say.
Thank you very much for that. That leads me to my next question from the floor, which is, how do we connect the dots of good practices around mountain waste management, so at a regional or a global scale, to enable the national and local government policies to be more effective? So I think that's about learning and sharing. How do we ensure that what we know works in one area can be translated or transported to another? Thank you. That's a question for anyone on the panel.
So,
Sorry, Renata?
yeah, then I will start. So how to bring the information and best practices to another area. I think today's webinar is a good example to do that. But I can imagine also if each member country of the plastic treaty puts up its action plan, other parties will see what the actions are. They can connect together, and yeah, so over time it will be, how to say, these practices and knowledge will be shared.
Excellent, thanks. Irma, is your hand still up? No, that's an old hand. Okay. Would anyone else like to weigh in on that point? Manoush.
Yeah, during my presentation, I gave a few examples for each of those solutions at various levels, and we have compiled these success stories from various regions in the world, and it's now on our website in form of fact sheets and bulletins. Perhaps if people are interested, you could look at those. And for some of the pilot projects that I mentioned in several countries that we have, we're gonna draw from those examples in close consultations with the countries and see which ones resonate with them and they want to implement and try it in their country. And of course, with each of these pilot projects, it would be important to keep sustainability in mind, whether we could scale it up, continue and sustain it in long term. And we usually do that in close consultations with countries. But yeah, we have the compilation of a lot of good examples. You heard a few of them. Please take a look at our website.
Excellent, Manoush. Thank you so much for that. Maybe put your website in the public chat. Thank you for that. So now a question, a question for all of the panelists. What do you each believe that the Plastics Treaty needs to address? What are the key provisions that you would like to see in the text of our ultimate Plastics Treaty? Irma, is that a new hand?
Yes, yes. Actually, what I really wanted to see in this new legal instrument regarding the plastic, of course, so when it comes to, as we all agreed and mentioned, I mean, the plastic challenge should be nationalized, I would say, as a challenge, and do some proper action plan, I would say, regarding the plastic waste management or whatever the chemicals. And EPR development and EPR creation is a must do. It should be somehow there, and give some kind of, I mean, recycling targets, whatever, for plastic. That really matters. And but without EPR, I don't see the way to reach this kind of actions. But what is most important also, even development of action plans on plastic management or whatever. So it's very necessary to have the list of chemicals, like, which are concerns actually. And I would say the financial mechanism, especially for developing and countries with economic transition, should be somehow there. Whatever, we have very good examples, even under the BRS, there is, yeah, we know the global environmental facilities there. Many, I mean, environmental funds can be created for this, if not new, then existing one. I mean, to support the countries actually do the monitoring and assessment and to come up with the priorities in the country somehow to follow. And this financial instrument really matters, I mean, for the enforcement of this new legally binding document, I would say. So without those kind of instruments, there are many others, but the general one, just why why I want to underline those issues. Like countries like we are, it's really necessary to have this kind of elements there. So, and of course, other procedures as it is, and of course, what's necessary, reporting back to the Secretariat and to do some assessments, I mean, based on that. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent, thank you for that. Would any of our other panelists like to say what they would like to see in the text of the Plastics Treaty?
I think I would like to insist on the transboundary movement of plastic waste, because I don't know if it's part of plastic treaties or not, but countries like low-income countries like Nepal, we face significant challenge to reach industries because we do not have sufficient recycling industries within the country. And suddenly countries like China, India, they are banning import of plastic waste, which is very reasonable. But at the same time, it hampers countries like us, and we are facing similar issues in electronic waste management also, where the Basel Convention kind of restricts transboundary movement. So now what we see is the increase of illegal channels being used to actually transport waste from our country to another country. So this cannot be really solved at a national level, but it has to be kind of looked at in a global scale, where countries which has limited capacity will probably need some support in this aspect.
Oh, very, very good point about that. Thank you. I understand that 2 participants have raised their hands. Lars, could you assist me in giving them one of them the floor, please?
Shall I go ahead?
Please do.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I am Ram Charitra Shah from Sifek, Nepal. I am echoing what our friend from Nepal said. In case of mountaineering plastic pollution, one of the difficulties is, despite of collecting so far, to what extent, bringing them down to the recycling center is another challenging. Like, it is not easy to bring, and lifting the waste by using aeroplane is very much extensively cost engage in there. So that is one aspect where all the collected waste cannot be brought down. So there should be something out there in the upstream. My question is another aspect, I'm advocating for inclusion of a specific Mount Everest, which is the peak of the world. And it has got microplastic contamination in a snow and water sample collected over 8,400 meters from mean sea level. And it is Sagarmatha National Park is also the World Heritage Site. And then most of the source of the microplastic coming there is the mountaineering, and another is the air flux from the nearby, which is mostly, both of them are mostly from outside. So my question is how we can ensure inclusion of high mountain plastic, specifically in the treaty text first, and then along with the inclusion of provision, how we can address those. Since my thought is, until and unless we clean up a stream, downstream, which cannot be clean, which is the aim of the UN plastic upcoming treaty. So that is my concern. The second thing I was supposed to ask, how we can make the responsible of the mountaineering people, which is coming from outside, to clean up the mess they do in the high mountain in case of Nepal. Since it is beyond our individual capacity, it is beyond our institutional and even government capacity to to clean up high mountain plastic, and the flux is cutting from outside basically. So how we can make those outsider responsible to clean up the high mountain plastic, which is not happening. Something is there in our high mountaineering related act, but it is not being effectively implemented. So these are the few questions I have. And even in case of recycling, we have tested some of the recycled pellet of the plastic, which is full of chemicals like UB382. There are other chemicals which is banned globally, and that has been traced in the recycled pellets. So in the name of circular economy, we cannot just blanket or blindly say that a plastic can be recycled and all that. All kind of plastic would not be supposed to be recycled, since it has found to be heavily contaminated. Even the sample from Nepal was included in that global study. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention, Mr. Shah. I think the questions you have asked are of such extent that we would need a whole seminar to be able to respond properly on those. I'm not sure, Raghav, if you wanted to respond on any of that at this point.
I think it's something very interesting, not only on Mount Everest, and maybe Kika can also answer on that. It's just the way we can protect national parks or natural reserves or any parks, any remote places from plastic pollution. And if in the treaty there should be a specific place allocated to those areas, and I think it's a very good idea. And of course, we should have a good balance between tourism, economical aspect, and also the plastic pollution. What's good with the plastic pollution somehow, it's because it's visible compared to other type of pollution. So it's a way to show that our activity, any human activity, has an impact on the ecosystem, on the biodiversity, etc. So it's a good point right here. Could maybe like it will be in the ocean, like in specific areas in the ocean, there will be specific places, let's say, hopefully protected from plastic. We can imagine that in mountainous area, in national parks, we can try to protect those environments from plastic pollution. That's a very good idea.
Thank you very much for that last point. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our session with only 2 minutes to go before we need to close. So I want to thank all the panelists for their rich insights. I think I like to believe that this information will feed into the next session of the INC, which starts next week in Paris. And I'd like to give a big thanks to my colleagues in Grid Arendal as well as UNEP, but most of all, very much the panelists and everyone that attended today. It's been a very rich discussion, and we welcome your continued engagement in this session. With that, Bjorn, do you have any last words?
No, I think you said it very well. So
Okay.
I'll leave it for you to close. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you once again. Please do continue engaging with this group of people. Do continue engaging in the INC, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.